Mine works.
Here we are.
Thank you so much.
Well, welcome, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We're waiting just a little while everyone takes their seats and we can kick off. This is, of course, the Global Leaders Investment Dialogue. You heard one after the opening this morning, but this is the second one of the day, and we would like for all of you to be present, to be here, to hear, of course, what our esteemed panelists have to say about the many multiple challenges that we face today.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah, because I was thinking, I can't hear him.
Okay, I believe we can start. Excellent. Well, thank you once again. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Sharanjeet Lail. It's a real privilege for me to be here, to be moderating this wonderful session. It's all about long-term solutions for multiple crises that we're currently facing. And of course, it is a global leaders dialogue with some extraordinary panelists. And I'd like to kick off, of course, to give the floor to the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference for Trade and Development, Rebecca Greenspan. Secretary General, please. Yes. Can we get the Secretary General's microphone to work, please?
From here?
We're having some audio problems on the stage. Could we, I
Hello?
believe it's working?
Yes.
Fantastic. Over
yes,
to you.
Finally. Okay, thank you very much. Let me say a warm welcome to the panelists. We have wonderful panelists today, and thank you, Sharanjeet Lail, for being our moderator today. We are honored to have you here. And let me just welcome Obaid Amran, Chief Executive Officer, Itmar Capital Morocco, and Acting Chair of the International Forum for Sovereign Wealth Funds. Thank you so much for being here. To Dominic N., Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, East West Bank, and Chairman of the APEC Business Council. Thank you, Dominic. Camila Escobar, Chief Executive Officer of Juan Valdez Café. You have to understand, she's Colombian, I am Costa Rica. And we have fought for who has the best coffee in the world for ages. But I have to admit that the marketing of Juan Valdez is just won the war. So thank you, Carolina, for being here. Camila. Dr. Colin Hunt, Chief Executive Officer of Allied Irish Banks. Thank you so much, sir, for being here. And Omar El Hamamsi. Omar, are you here with us? Yes? Chief Executive Officer, Orascom Development Holding. And we will have also a video from Robert Habeck, Vice Chancellor and Minister for Economic Affairs and Climate Protection of the Federal Republic of Germany. So, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, in my remarks this morning, I mentioned a very impressive number. I talked about $6 trillion. This is how much the sustainable finance market is currently worth. That is the value in global capital markets of green bonds, social bonds, ESG funds, and similar products, all added up. This market has grown several times over in recent years. That is good news. If we could rely on the growth of sustainable finance to fill the investment gap, we would be very happy and are in a better shape, but we cannot. And one reason is that not all sustainable finance products do what they promise. It is true that sustainable funds outperform other funds on environmental, social, and governance criteria. But greenwashing persists. The average ESG rating of more than 2,800 sustainable funds that we monitor in UNCTAD is better than that of the benchmark global equity index. That's good news. But at least a quarter of funds fail to live up to their sustainability credentials. So there is work to be done, in this quarter of the funds. If we look at institutional investors, many are making good progress on sustainability performance. For example, 2/3 of the sovereign wealth funds and pension funds that we monitor have now committed to achieving net zero in their investment portfolios by 2050. Still, nearly half do not report on sustainability-related risks and are not moving quickly enough to reorient their portfolios. The result is that too many of the financial products labeled as sustainable really translate into very little impact on the ground. Not enough funds are going into new renewable energy plants, water and sanitation installations, agriculture projects, hospitals. And only 5% of all sustainable funds are located in developing countries. That is really the problem that we were saying today. In the aggregate, everything looks good, but in the distribution, there is still a lot to be done. So a lot of work is currently being done by regulators and standard setters around the world to remedy the worst excesses that we have seen, and also UNCTAD is working very closely with stock exchanges, institutional investors, and accounting bodies to contribute to this. But ultimately, this is only part of the job. We need to think further about how to increase the flow of funds to developing countries. If fiduciary rules do not allow institutional investors to fund projects in developing countries, then we need to look again at the rules and see if there is room for improvement in a way that is fair and reasonable. If risk rating prevents the flow of sustainable finance because of unsustainable debt levels, then we need to make debt levels sustainable. And for that, we need debt restructuring and debt relief. To make debt sustainable, we need to make countries sustainable. If to pay our debts, we need to cut hospital budgets and school hours, then this will not help anyone. UNCTAD is working closely with the G20 on this, but much more action is needed, and we don't feel the sense of urgency that these issues deserve. If projects in low-income countries are too small and too uncertain to be attractive, then we need to help those countries structure portfolios of projects that are big enough and spread risk. And we will hear today, some of the good lessons and good experiences that there are around the world. So in the last year and a half, we have gone from a world of zero interest rates, marked by extensive QE and high asset prices, to now a world where US Treasuries are paying over 5%, and some long-duration bonds have crashed so much that they make you think crypto is safe by comparison. It's not safe. What comes next is very hard to predict. The world is in transition, and the problem with transitions is that we can get lost in them. So it is never too late to learn the right lessons. As the zero interest rate world fades out, we must conclude that much of it didn't go to the new investments, the new ideas, and the new sectors. A lot was wasted in asset price inflation. We underinvested in renewables. Cheap debt incentivized zombie corporates and short-term buybacks. And most of the Global South could not access cheap money as yields spread widened. So, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, as markets now turn to a new phase of price discovery, let us remember where the risks are. And the risks are in failing the SDGs and failing the people, in under-investing in them, in leaving people behind. So I want to conclude with one simple thought. As we navigate this evolving financial landscape, let's cut through the noise and focus on the hard truths. The funds exist, but their allocation has been misguided. Let's recognize that mispriced risk doesn't just jeopardize investment portfolios, it jeopardizes human lives. Every dollar misallocated is a missed opportunity to fuel tangible change on the ground. Every unsustainable debt trap that traps nations in cycles that hinder development and progress won't yield the results we want. Today, countries have no fiscal space for mistakes. Today, inaction is a cost we simply cannot afford. That's why we are here, because we will learn from the panelists. We will learn from the good experience. We will learn from the solutions that they are proposing. And we together can scale it up to avoid a lost decade for a lot of the developing world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Secretary General of UNCTAD, Rebecca Greenspan. That was so wonderfully summarized, some of the key issues, those multiple crises that we are facing this year, next year, and the decade ahead if we are to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, of course, this session kicks off a week where we'll be looking at many panels that will be tackling some of the key issues, the food crisis, the fuel crisis, and of course the finance crisis. We'll be focused on things such as food security, the energy transition, health systems, supply chain resilience, and productive capacity growth for the poorest countries. And this year's World Investment Report released by UNCTAD showed that the annual SDG investment gap in developing countries widened from $2.5 trillion in 2015 to $4 trillion right now. And of course, you've heard this figure also mentioned in the opening session this morning. We know this increase is due to the inadequate investment and multiple needs that the globe needs. So in this session, we really want to learn how we can begin to close that gap. We want to explore how international finance and cross-border investment can foster a more inclusive, sustainable, and resilient world. Now, we're going to be hearing from each of our eminent speakers very shortly and then move on to a moderated discussion. But next, I'd like to introduce His Excellency, Dr. Robert Habeck. He's the Vice Chancellor of Germany and the Minister for Economic Affairs and Climate Protection, who sent us this video message. Please play the video.
Secretary General Greenspan, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, in about 6 weeks' time, we will be meeting again at COP28, just a few kilometers from the venue of this summit. The consequences of climate change are now being clearly felt in many places. Tackling this crisis is one of the greatest and most urgent challenges of our time. Investment for sustainable development, the motto of this summit, is closely linked with the issue of COP28 and is a very, very urgent matter. It is not certain whether we will succeed in attaining the sustainability goals of the Agenda 2030. The COVID-19 pandemic and Russia's devastating war against Ukraine have set us back in our efforts to attain several of the Sustainable Development Goals. We need to reverse this trend. Investment is essential on the path to sustainable transition. We need to build power plants for the generation of renewable energy and to invest in electrification, energy efficiency building, and the decarbonization of industry for the energy transition to succeed. This year's UNTEC World Investment Report shows that we need to invest around $4 trillion annually to attain the Sustainable Development Goals. This, of course, also includes sustainable private investment. Private investors need a reliable policy environment and incentives to invest. It is our task as members of governments and the international community to create this environment. We have already taken several measures to improve the situation in Germany. The German federal government has launched legislation to accelerate the expansion of renewable energy in Germany and to simplify planning and approval procedures. The government draft of the Growth Opportunity Act provides incentives for investments in clean and environmentally friendly technologies. It is, however, also important that we help developing countries and emerging economies to implement the sustainable transition by facilitating investments. We therefore issue investment guarantees to ensure German direct investment in developing countries and emerging economies against political risks. We want to help developing countries and emerging economies so that they can benefit from private capital in a sustainable way. This is why our investment policy is always based on high environmental, social and human rights standards. Insured projects should be compatible with the 1.5-degree target of the Paris Agreement. For this purpose, we are currently drawing up a climate strategy for our guarantee instruments. Furthermore, Germany helps developing countries and emerging economies through our international climate initiative to facilitate sustainable investment in the energy transition. At 33 billion euros in 2022, Germany is the world's second largest donor of official development assistance. This also considerably contributes to sustainable development. In addition, we need to adjust the financial system to strengthen investment in sustainability. The IFC 30 by 30 project, which is founded by us in a contribution to the transformation of the financial system. The aim is to build capacities for climate risk assessment and reporting. Investors increasingly expect companies to report on their compliance with sustainability standards. In 2022, the International Sustainability Standards Board was set up with support from the German federal government and the German finance sector. I very much welcome the cooperation between the ISSB and the ANTAC in this field. I am pleased to be able to announce that we will strengthen this cooperation in future. Support in the form of capacity building and the training will be provided, for example, to Mexico and Cameroon and the respective regions to help them implement international financing reporting standards. ANTAC offers an excellent platform for international dialogue. Its work is very valuable, helping developing countries to benefit from sustainable investments. I would like to take this opportunity to thank ANTAC for this. In particular, I welcome ANTAC's commitment to make investment facilitation a key issue in order to better integrate developing countries in global investment flows. Transparency, efficient approval procedures, the effective fight against corruption and the promotion of responsibility business conduct are central elements when it comes to benefiting from foreign direct investments. I am therefore delighted that these elements have been included in the current text for an agreement on investment facilitation for development in the WTO. More than 110 members of the WTO already support this text. Let us use this World's Investment Forum to intensify our efforts for investment and sustainable development. Let us contribute to a positive change. Thank you for your attention.
And that was the Vice-Chancellor of Germany, Robert Habeck, speaking there. Now we'll hear from each of our panelists who will set the scene for us at the very start, and this is really to address the question of how will the multiple recent crises that you've been hearing about in the area of food, fuel and finance affect international investment and the challenges and opportunities that exist in trying to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So let's start from the end of the session there. Of course, we heard from the Secretary General. Thank you so much, Rebecca Greenspan. But right next to you, I believe, is Mr. Dominic Ng, Chairman and CEO of East West Bank. He's also the Chairman of APEC Business Council. Dominic, do you want to begin setting the scene for us in terms of your perspective of how you see the current situation of the multiple crises that we're facing?
Thank you. Yeah, as you mentioned that I am actually currently having two full-time jobs. One being the Chairman CEO of East West Bank for the last 3 decades, and also this year as the chair of the Business Advisory Council of APAC, which is in short called ABAC. And as many of you may know, that our APAC Summit will be coming in November, which will take place in the second week of November in San Francisco. And this will be, it's been 12 years since US host APAC. The last one was President Obama host APAC in Hawaii. And so I think President Biden is very much looking forward, to make sure that we'll have a very productive and APAC summit to get some meaningful, tangible outcome. It's interesting that the theme that we have today on sustainability is very similar to the theme of APAC. Our APAC 2023 theme is creating a resilient and sustainable future for all. And to complement that, ABAC, the Business Advisory Council that I chair, we also have a theme called Equity, Sustainability, and Opportunity. As a matter of fact, today just happened to be the day that ABAC will release our published report and recommendation to the economy leaders, all 21 economy leaders of APAC. We're going to release that report publicly. So I think that this will be a good time for me to just briefly highlight the part that related to sustainability. We actually cover many different areas, but on the sustainability areas, it's very simple. 3 simple messages. The first one is that all the recommendations that we have from ABAC to the APAC economy leaders are not just for the APAC region. In fact, every single recommendation that we have there, when you have a chance to read it later on today through our website, you will find these recommendations to be very applicable throughout the world. Everything that we ask APAC regions to do, in fact, I think is very much applicable to what we talked about today in the forum. And the second message that we have for APAC leaders is that we would like to see APAC leaders to adopt the climate leadership principles that APAC recommend, which is 1, to reduce emission, accelerate that process quickly, and 2nd, to adapt to a low carbon economy, and 3rd, and what's most important, is to make sure that we have just transition. It's important to have just transition to ensure that all people can benefit from it and not getting harmed because of sustainability initiative that cause small and middle-sized business or indigenous people or women business to be suffer from it. And so those are the 3 key messages that we send to the APAC leaders. And in addition to it, we also suggest that APAC leaders need to prioritize and leverage trade, and using trade to focus on investing in renewable energy and also environmental goods and services. And so those are the things that some of the highlights that we have on the sustainability area. I just want to end with one note, is that ABAC fully believe that inclusivity is a key. When we start working on sustainability initiative, if we only have government entities working with multilateral NGO and also major corporations, and without taking consideration of the voices of MSME or women, indigenous people, and not working with local domestic commercial banks, etc., we wouldn't be able to effectively reach our goal of what we just talked about earlier today. So my suggestion is that we always need to focus on making sure get all people involved with climate change initiative. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dominique. And so good to hear from the APEC Business Council's perspective on these issues as well, because of course that is another key meeting that we are watching for amongst all the others ahead of COP28 as well, where pledges are being made for many, many countries to try to commit into policy a lot of the environmental things that they have promised. Now we can move on to Mr. Obed Amren. He's the chair of the International Forum of Sovereign Wealth Funds from Morocco and also the CEO of ISMA Capital. Mr. Obed, if you could give us a sense of your perspective on what needs to be done so that we can try to start to fill that gap when it comes to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly when it comes to investment flows.
Thank you. Thank you, Saranjit. Good afternoon to everyone gathered here at the World Investment Forum.
I think we're having some trouble hearing you, Mr. Obed. If you could bring the microphone a bit closer to you. Is that better?
Okay. Good?
Yes, we can
fine?
hear. Bit better now.
Good afternoon to everyone gathered here at the World Investment Forum. It is both an honor and a privilege to me to share my views with the other distinctive global leaders. I want first to congratulate UNCTAD and the United Arab Emirates for the successful organization for this event and for bringing together key decision makers to advance on a critical discussion on the investment and development agenda, especially in light of the current challenge our world is facing. Let me first perhaps give you some words about what are the sovereign wealth funds, what are their mandate, and how they can impact the challenges, the investment and the development agenda we are facing. It is important to emphasize that over the recent year, the nature and the mandate of sovereign wealth fund have witnessed a significant evolution and diversification. Initially, sovereign wealth funds were entrusted with public money for stabilization or diversification purposes and invested mainly in international financial markets driven by financial returns, thus the nomination of wealth fund. Over the recent years, and especially in emergent markets, a more recent type of sovereign wealth fund has emerged, being the strategic ones. These funds have a double bottom line approach targeting both financial return and development impact. This is the case for the African continent, for example, or for some of the European public and development actors that have embraced the sovereign fund mandate and role to maximize their impact. If you look at the composition of the International Forum of Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is the representative organization of the sovereign fund community in the international fora, and which we have the privilege of sharing, the membership have been recently greatly diversified with the adherence of a number of strategic funds from emerging markets. Strategic funds have a unique operational model as they seek to support national sector strategies and development targets. To fully play this catalytic and development role, they get involved in the early stage of the project development phase. They also seek to seed and develop venture capital platform or try to help their respective economies to spread out of their borders. With the objective to co-develop and co-invest and leverage with international partner and investor. This allows them to be a key actor of local economies and play an important role in time of crisis. Indeed, most of governments, for example, turned to their sovereign wealth fund during the COVID pandemic to support in the short term their liquidity needs or their national medium-term responses, such as vaccine manufacturing facilities or support to their SMEs, among others. This has been a remarkable shift from the 2008 global financial crisis, for example, where sovereign funds action was external supporting, for example, large financial institutions abroad. To summarize, sovereign funds are nowadays a sophisticated and patient investor impacted by global trends and positioning themselves on a new investment opportunities. They have become integrated actors of their national economies, seeking to have a positive impact on the short, medium, and more importantly, on the longer term, all that with a powerful counter-cyclical impact.
Thank you, Mr. Obeid Amren. That's very interesting to hear the Sovereign Wealth Fund perspective on how to tackle some of these multiple crises that we've been talking about. We can move on to Camila Escobar, the CEO of Juan Valdez Cafe, and I have to say I do concur with Secretary General Rebecca Greenspan in that Juan Valdez coffee is absolutely wonderful. We should all try some. But give us your sense of how you see things from a private sector perspective of the many challenges that we're facing.
And first, I want to thank you very, very much for the invitation, for being here. Thank you, Ms. Greenspan. And I am today speaking here in the name of developing countries, in the name of the agricultural sector, in the name of coffee, both Costa Rican, Colombian, and from everywhere in the world, and also from the Juan Valdez brand, which some of you might know. So just a little bit of story of where the Juan Valdez brand fits and how it is a good example to talk about financial institutions and the financial system as a support for the development. So the National Federation of Coffee Growers of Colombia created Procafecol, a private company, to represent the Juan Valdez brand, which is almost like a national brand. It represents 540,000 Colombian coffee growers 20 years ago with one purpose, which was to captivate the world with the best of Colombian coffee, but in favor of the coffee growers. So capturing the end value of a cup of coffee in favor of the coffee growers. And that's how for 20 years, since 2002, we have been growing. We have a presence of in more than 38 countries now. We have more than 550 stores, and actually are going to open our first flagship store here in Dubai this December. So with this in mind, I think this is a great example on how one product from the rural areas ends up being commercialized and capturing value for its main shareholders, with the coffee growers. And I think, and I would like to talk today about three main challenges that agricultural sector and in general the rural sector has. The first one is poverty. We all know that rural areas, and for instance in Colombia, in the coffee region, poverty is 1 times higher than in the rest of the country. And we could talk a lot about statistics here, but the role of financing is going to be key to fight poverty. And one example that we have been pursuing from the private sector is that we believe that, for instance, gender equality is going to be key to fight poverty, because it is proved that 90% of the income that women gets invested into their families and their communities. So there's an example. We produce a product that's 100% commercialized by women, which is Mujeres Cafeteras, and this was a product that was created in 2017 and now represents our best seller in 12 countries, and it fosters it is an encouragement to fight poverty in the rural areas. The second challenge that I would like to highlight today is an aging population in developing countries. Young populations, new generations don't want to stay in the rural areas because they don't see opportunities. So they are migrating to the big cities with all the challenges that we know they have there, looking for opportunities. So if financial institution and the financial sector could switch their attention to rural areas, probably this would be an encouragement for younger populations to stay in the rural areas. Only 23% of rural areas get financing, and it is even less if we look at at agricultural sector and in youth. Because it's seen as a risk product, as a risky opportunity. It has no land security, so not a lot of money goes into this area. So definitely betting to the youth is something that we need to do. And the third challenge, of course, is climate change. A lot of impact has been observed in rural areas. Coffee production is coming down, not only in Colombia, but in all coffee growing regions. But technology is really difficult to implement, especially in a country like Colombia, where the farmers are very small and they own less than 4 hectares. So technology migration is not very easy to observe. So these are only 3 challenges that we can see, but how can the financial system and in general the financial ecosystem can help? Definitely migrating resources to these rural areas, to the businesses in these rural areas, and this would foster definitely productivity, competitiveness, technology, and it will start to solve and to help solve the problems that we see in our countries and in our regions. So it is not only about governments, both from developing countries, setting stable frameworks, or developed countries, migrating resources to these countries, but it's also a task of the financial system, of NGOs, of the multilateral organizations to switch our focus. And as you mentioned, it's not a matter of resources, it's a matter of where we put our bet to put those resources in. So I think this is one of the key issues that we are seeing.
Indeed, very well said, Camilla, and it's so interesting to hear those perspectives. Some of the challenges that you face, obviously the poverty, the fact that there's an issue around employment, getting the right talent, and of course, finally, climate change is an ongoing issue that many of us face as a planet. Next, we can go to Colin Hunt. He's the CEO of Allied Irish Bank. We've heard so many different perspectives already today. Obviously, we had the UN agency, we had the APEC Business Council, we had a sovereign wealth fund, we had an SME private sector, and now we've got Allied Irish Bank, which is a large-ish bank in Ireland. Give us your perspective of some of the challenges that you think we're facing in the current state of play.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. I describe us as a medium-sized bank, but a very large one in an Irish context. The challenges we're talking about today, the greatest one is climate change. And climate change, climate emergency, is something which is exacerbating the other challenges in relation to health, in relation to food, in relation to water. And the status quo is not available to us as an option. Because in the absence of us addressing this seriously, globally, and in the very, very near term, all of these factors that are vital to life, some of the basic fundamentals of life, food and shelter, suffer even more. And we see the security of the world being degraded. So I think it's the biggest challenge of our generation. I think our children and our grandchildren will never forgive us if we fail to address it. And it sits at the very, very core of the organisation that I lead. And practically what we have done is we've set out our own ambitions to be carbon neutral by 2030. You won't believe this, but as of the end of next month, 80% of our businesses' energy requirements will be supplied from 2 solar farms in Ireland, of all places.
Interesting.
Solar farms in Ireland. Who would have thought? We also have revised our third-party supplier code to ensure that those businesses that we do business with, the businesses that supply us, that they ascribe the same sort of sustainability ambitions that we do. And thirdly, we have made a commitment that 70% of all our new lending will be green or transitional in nature by 2030. We're making very, very good progress on that. I do think it's really important that we agree on a set of principles, and I think that the conference has been fantastic. And I commend the Secretary-General for her leadership in this space and for her comments both this morning and earlier today. But we are still dealing with people who say this is a hoax, who would deny what is plainly obvious to us all. The world is changing in front of our eyes, and the world, to quote the UN Secretary-General, we are now in an era of global boiling. So it's real, it's not a hoax. And it doesn't respect borders. So regardless of what regional or national banks do, it's going to require a far, far broader, international, global, coordinated response at a level that we probably have never before witnessed. The capital need is immense. You gave the number, the 4 trillion number. It's immense. And the public sector doesn't have the resource available to it anywhere. The private sector has the resources, and it has the ambition to deploy it. If you can prove that you are serious in your intent and that you aren't indulging in greenwashing, you will have capital flowing to you. We demonstrate that on an ongoing basis. We've raised over €5 billion from the capital markets in the past 2 years to fund green and social developments. And in fact, we're in the market this afternoon. The trade is going well, I understand. We're raising €750 million in green bonds to do even more as we speak. So the private sector has the resources. There is this massive, immediate, compelling need out there. So why isn't the capital flowing? It's a reasonably simple question. Why is it that capital, which is incentivized and influenced by 2 factors, risk and return, why is it not flowing? We solve that conundrum, we will be a hell of a long way along the path to addressing this issue. Ultimately, you can't, in my view, justify significantly higher returns, so we need to look at reduced risks. And we will only mitigate the risks effectively if we address 2 things: a common global taxonomy in relation to what do we mean by green. And the EU, I think, has done tremendous work in this space in the past number of years. But we need a global common taxonomy. And we also need greater empowerment of the multilateral agencies. Because this is not a local, national or regional crisis. It is a truly global crisis, and it requires a truly global response. Because we won't address it unless it is a global response. So I personally would like to see a significantly enhanced role and activity for the multilateral agencies, in particular the United Nations and the World Bank, in terms of the taxonomy, but also in terms of issuance and potential co-guarantor roles.
Thank you for that, Colin. And it's a very clear message. It's a message that we've been hearing pretty much all day. I think we'll continue to hear throughout the week this need to de-risk by going to the public sector, by going to the private sector, by going to multilateral development banks, so that we really are all working together as a society to try to address some of the big issues, the key issues of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, finally, our final speaker, Omar El Hamamsi, you're the Group Chief Executive Officer of Orascom Development Holdings. You represent the property development point of view, so give us a sense of how you see the state of play at the moment.
Thank you. Well, I mean, today we're all gathered here to take stock, basically, and take a real look at the problems that are facing us all. Now, we're not here, I think, as individual representatives of companies or governments or NGOs. I think the whole idea is to think about this as a collective. Because if we're really going to start solving these problems that we're talking about, problems that range from climate crisis to the growing inequality that we also had the opportunity to discuss over lunch, from food security to the global pandemics that we have. The only way to do this is, frankly, with extreme collaboration between all parties, especially the private and the public sector. Now, at Orascom Development, as the leader of a private sector company that creates integrated and sustainable towns for over 35 years in both mature and emerging markets, we have been doing a lot of this historically in partnerships with the countries and the governments in which, with whom we operate. We have today 10 such operating towns in Europe, North Africa, and the GCC. And we've only been able to accomplish this in complete collaboration and work with the governments in order to build the structures and the networks that enable us to actually generate that economic return, both for the private sector company that is us, but also for the local governments. Now, our work in emerging markets has provided those places, those governments, with hard and soft infrastructure. What I mean by this is, in the towns we've built, we've provided roads, we've provided power, we've provided education infrastructure, schools, we've provided hospitals, we've provided and we operate airports, etc. And that only comes in order to, if you will, complement the governments which may not necessarily have the revenue base to put that kind of infrastructure in place, particularly in more remote or secondary towns or cities, or in places that they want to have touristic or economic development in, but are not necessarily easily reachable. Now, it may sound a little bit unusual for a private sector company, let alone one that's listed on the Swiss Stock Exchange, to be in this business, right? But because for us it's so important to develop those local communities, because it's so important for us to create those jobs, it's so important for us to have those true economic development, co-existing relationships with the governments with whom we work, we've managed to make it work so far. Now, just as the climate crisis is quite indicative of the interconnectedness of our ecosystems, the way we do business, from our supply chains, our sourcing, our commitment to ethics, we create our own biospheres in the same exact way. Our behavior not only impacts our own individual businesses, but also our people, our suppliers, and the broader economies and markets in which we operate. Recognizing this interconnectedness is essential. In our minds, not only do we have to provide the capital, the expertise, and the development objectives, but also we work with the governments that we work with to make sure that we have a few pieces of the puzzle in place. And in my mind, at least, those pieces of the puzzle, particularly in emerging markets that are absolutely essential for that co-development, include transparent and stable legal frameworks for development that span multiple decades. I highlighted that, in the business of town development, you do this over 30, 40, 50, 100 years. We've been at it for 35, and we feel like we're just getting started. So you need to have those very stable legal frameworks. You have to have an environment where the respect for the legal contracts over the long term is established and is really respected from all sides. You have to have a flexible and rapid implementation of the regulatory environment. What role does the government play? What role does the public sector play? Public sector companies, that is. And what role do private sector companies play? And what are the rules for engaging and entering each other's spaces? And how do we do that in a constructive and mutually beneficial way? You have to obviously streamline the way you do business, and that pretty much goes without saying. And we have to make sure that as the landscape evolves and as governments decide that they want to enter businesses that the private sector is in, that they do this in a manner that is very predictable, understandable, and that continues to leave the playing field very much equal between private and public sectors. I'm an optimist. I'm very confident that we can make this work in many of the emerging markets in which we operate, and that's for the better development and for closing and for reaching a lot of the SDGs that the UN has set by 2030. And I think collaborating with our peers in companies, collaborating with our peers in the government and with NGOs is absolutely the way to do that.
Absolutely, and well said. As you say, it's, we're thinking a lot about different issues here, but of course the legal and regulatory frameworks have to be in place for investors to want to go in, for these trade flows to start. So let's now go into our moderated session. We've heard from all of you. It's really interesting to hear all your different, very varied perspectives from the very different backgrounds you all come from. But let's talk about some of the key policies here. And obviously we heard from the Secretary General this morning about how we really need to come up with innovative solutions to try to channel the funds to the places that need it most. And these are the least developed countries. These are countries with very little infrastructure, with perhaps lacking some of those regulatory frameworks that you talked about. What needs to happen to channel those funds where they need to go? And how can all of you come together to start working on that? So let's hear some examples of solutions that you may have in your own respective sectors. Talk to us about some of these solutions and how they've worked to benefit some of the, you know, the poorest within your country or your sector. So let's start with who would like to jump in here to talk about some examples and solutions. Yes, Camilla.
I can share a very specific example on how to migrate resources to these unresolved issues or these more vulnerable areas. And I think we've probably all of us talked about something today, which is collaboration, right? This is not an issue of one single entity solving a problem. And as I mentioned, since 2017, we've pursued a bet, because it is like that. It was a risky situation that needed a bold solution regarding how women in the rural areas commercialize their products versus other, like men or other communities. So what we did is that we partnered with commercial banks, we partnered with multilateral organizations, with NGOs and the private sector, also the commercial financial sector, as I mentioned, to bet on these women. And what we got from that is that we entered into a programmatic approach that strengthens their capacities not only in terms of production and commercialization, but also in terms of financial education, in terms of associations around their businesses, in terms of climate change mitigation. And what we have gotten out of it is that they not only have been able to get financing for their own projects, but that they also have broadened the impact of the benefits and the well-being of money flowing into their regions, into their communities. And as I mentioned before, the bet paid, and it paid greatly because this is our first selling product right now, only 1.5 years after we made that bet. It is an amazing example on how you can articulate around a specific project. This, of course, is a very single project, but I think it can be an example of how to broaden this into other sectors. And I think, just to end, 3 keywords are key. So the first one is connections. I think we need connections in everything we do to bet into the right projects. The second one is collaboration, once you do those connections. And the third one is trust, because we definitely, and I'm an optimist as well, we definitely need to trust that these bets are going to pay off in the short, middle, and long term.
Thank you for that, Camilla. And you're absolutely right. Connection, collaboration, trust, And that was something we heard from earlier during the opening from the presidents of Togo and Kyrgyzstan. This need for trust between the public sector and the private sector is absolutely key. Mr. Obeid, I believe you want to say something here?
Yes, please. I want to talk about a very interesting experience we are conducting. We have heard this morning how Africa is suffering from the gap of financing. And we heard also about the fact that this part of the world is bearing the burden of a misunderstanding of or over risk perception from the investor. So we have taken the initiative to say how to make, because we talk about connections, we talk about how to channel investment to those parts of the world. And at the end of the day, we should create the best lending, not to lending like for a plane, a lending space for the investment, for the investor or the institutional players to be able to bring their money to real, available, and bankable projects. So for that, we launch what we call the ASIF, which is the African Sovereign Investment Forum, gathering 12 African sovereign wealth funds to collaborate and coordinate their action, either in exchanging information, best practices, but also to be more audible, direct project like in co-investing in their project, but also giving the diversification of either sectorial and geographical one. So working on that, we consider that we will create a facility that really talk the same way and the same language to the investor and institutional one. Another aspect that is important is to consider how sovereign wealth fund can contribute to new category of projects, like we are talking about future generation, and future generation needs sustainability, which is in the heart of any investment decision. And we consider that regarding the amount under management by the sovereign wealth funds, those can have a real impact of to reach the sustainable development goal or contribute to them. And we believe that the energy transition will create new and attractive investment opportunities, either in developed and developing markets and in various existing and new sectors, as green economy, digitalization, urbanization, food security, to name a few, as you spoke earlier about it. In this context, we have witnessed a number of strategic funds leading sustainable investment initiatives, such as carbon credit sale initiative like in Gabon, or fund dedicated to carbon emission with Nigeria, and in recent years, some solar and renewable energy projects led by sovereign wealth fund like in Djibouti and Senegal, and more recently on hydrogen, where a project has been established by sovereign wealth fund like Mubadala through Masdar, or PIF through PIF, to name a few. So in this context, a South-South and a South-North collaboration is crucial to ensure a transition And we strongly believe that we can efficiently leverage the implementation of government-to-government collaboration and strategies. We can also give another illustration, as you asked,
Yes.
when it comes to India, which has developed a very successful collaboration model between various sovereign funds to catalyze and capture the growth prospect of infrastructure
Yes.
in the country, with the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority play a major role. So
Thank you. I think that's a great
so
example
those are
of what
illustration
sovereign
that-
wealth funds
that-
can
that
do and
there
the
is a
impact
way
you can have.
to work together to create the channel on an industrial way
Absolutely.
to address investment opportunities that are existing and
That's
should
right.
be handled.
That's right. And to create the environment to enable those investments to take place is also crucial, as you said. Now, it's really interesting because I know, Dominic, you've talked about the need for blended finance to really try to address some of the situation as well. So give us your perspective on that.
Can you repeat, please? Can you repeat?
Dominic,
Yes,
the idea of blended finance, bringing
yeah,
that
in
together,
fact,
and the idea that we all need to come up with innovative solutions to funding. So blended finance, I believe, was the thing you wanted to talk about.
Yes, in fact, I think particularly for developing countries, blended finance is very much needed in order to make sure that some of these large sustainability project works. What's been happening is that I think particularly in countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, and the government has been taking a very strong position in working with the public-private partnership. And the blended finance actually get involved with not only the government working with private sectors like private equity funds or the sovereign wealth fund, or maybe other private investors and so forth, and working together. But oftentimes, there's a third pieces that come into it is that foundations, the large NGOs that, for example, like even the Gates Foundation that in the past always actively involved with health initiative, but there are more and more of these large foundations are now stepping in, recognizing climate change is a very, very significant issue that affects humanity for the next decade or two, coming very soon. And so more and more of these NGOs are also stepping in. It's almost acting like a mezzanine debt in addition to the secure lending coming from commercial banks. So with governments coming in, typical commercial bank that provides secure debt, and then you have private equity funds or maybe other investor coming as an equity at-risk investor, and then you add another layer of foundation who can actually help subsidize. That actually make a lot of those not quite viable projects become viable. And as a matter of fact, last year in Bali, the G20 leaders altogether have pledged to support blended finance. And I expect that in the next several years, you will see more and more of these examples coming up.
Thank you, Dominic. That's great to hear. Now, I'm hoping the audience are hearing us clearly. I think there's some challenges for us to hear each other on stage. We are trying, and I can pick out most of the gist of what you were saying at the end. Let's try Colin and Omar. You're a bit closer to me. I'm hoping I can hear your answers. But give us a sense of the kind of innovative solutions we need to come up with to try to address all these multiple issues that we're facing. And of course, you know, some solutions that you've come up with in your own industry.
Turn this on. I wouldn't like to portray, you know, this has been driven entirely by philanthropy.
Yep.
It is driven by self-interest. Because the inequalities that we all know that are out there, the social inequality, the international inequality, the gender inequality, inequalities always are corrected. There's something happens to correct them. And do you want that as business leaders, do you want that to be a disruptive correction, or do you want it to be an orderly correction? And if you want it to be an orderly correction, it imposes on you a responsibility to look beyond your normal stakeholder base. You need to be alert to the fact that your stakeholder group is broader than ever before in history. If you go back 30 or 40 years, somebody who was in our positions would have had a responsibility to our customers, our staff, and our shareholders. That was it. But now there's a far, far broader set of responsibilities. And that informs the sort of solutions that we've been trying to adopt, either in terms of our recruitment practices, being far more diverse than ever before in terms of how we recruit, but also in terms of our lending practices, and very deliberately targeting interventions like social housing and affordable housing. But it isn't enough to come out and sort of realise that you have this broader commitment. You have to do something about it. And I think the consequences of inaction are terrifying. So there's any amount of innovation out there, there's any amount of capital out there, let's bring them together.
Yeah, absolutely. Omar?
Yeah, maybe from a town development perspective, some of the innovations, if you want to call it this way, that we've participated in over the last few decades have been really, and starting almost 20 years ago, 30 years ago, on the whole ESG dimension. So on the environmental front, and maybe I'll take two examples of things we've been doing for a while now, for many years now. In our Swiss resort in the mountains, for example, Andermatt, we generate all of our power for all of our ski lift operations, all of our town operations, etc., all of our building, etc., operations for electricity in 100% renewable form. All our heating over there is also from a CO2 neutral source completely. Take another example on the Red Sea coast of Egypt, where we have the city of El Gouna, or the town of El Gouna. 95% of the sweet water that we consume, the potable water we consume, is actually water we extract from the sea, and we desalinate completely. 22% or so of our power is generated from solar cells, and we were selected by the UN many years ago already as the greenest city or town in all of Africa. And so I think that the environmental component is one that we've innovated with many years ago, and we continue to accelerate, obviously, especially in the last 10 years as people talk and look more at that. On the social side, we also think that there's some innovation here. The contracts effectively that we do with the government and the agreements that we set up, and they're highly customized agreements on a country by country and a market by market basis, enable us, encourage us, and that's what we want to do, to build actually truly integrated towns. So unlike, I think, perhaps what you might think of as a tourism development where you only have a 5-star or more hotel on the beach somewhere, and then all of the people who work there do not live on premise or within the same town. We've actually, from the very beginning, said we're going to build a town that's fully integrated with very high-end real estate, very high-end hotels, but also a true downtown for everybody to mingle in. All of our employees and people who work on site live in the same town. And I think from a social perspective there, that it builds a true, first, economic multiplier for the activities and hence for the government and the societies in which we live. And second, I think it truly goes in the direction of having social integration, which I think is critical for inequality reduction that we talk about, particularly in emerging markets.
Yeah. And building a community as well, which, as we know, is crucial because communities look after each other. Colin, you wanted to interject here.
Yeah, so some of the best innovations are really, really simple ones. So one of the things that we've done is introduce a concept called sustainability-linked loans. So if you can prove that you are going to be deploying the capital that we're giving you for an environmentally conscious or sustainable investment, you will get a rate discount. And it's a very, very simple concept. Now, the biggest part of our lending book, about half of our lending book, is mortgages. So what we do is if you've got a very energy efficient house, a house that is rated either A or B, using the European nomenclature, we will give you a substantial interest rate reduction for the period of the fix on your mortgage. And we also have it in the corporate sector. That's something that's really simple, because ultimately there's two decisions bankers make. Where do we deploy capital, and what do we charge for it? So we choose to deploy it in the green space, growingly in that direction, and we charge less for it.
Thank you. Yes, Camilla, go ahead.
To add on that, because I personally really believe that if there's an entity or a sector that can really, really change the world, is the financial sector.
Yes.
Just because of what has been said, and it's that when money goes into some specific projects and some specific way of thinking, it totally makes the difference. But for money to flow to that sectors and to those projects, I think it's key what has been mentioned, which is significant discounts need to be in place. Because otherwise, the big projects are still in the same countries, in the same old industries, that are not the ones that are going to be sustainable. And they get the benefits right now because of the size and the scale. So the big discounts, financial discounts, go to where the money used to go many years ago. So for it to flow to where it needs to go now, smaller countries, smaller projects, more sustainable technologies, what has been said, really big discounts need to be in place. So I smile with that.
Thank you. Yes, and I mean, echoing what Colin said earlier as well, philanthropy is also really key here, because if you want to have debt forgiveness, if you do want to then enable developing countries to truly succeed, that's one of the things that the financial world is going to start to have to look at. And this goes to my next point, because we keep hearing, and it's interesting because it's been mentioned a couple of times today, that there's this $6 trillion worth, a wall of funds that are going towards the green economy, green bonds, etc., but perhaps being deflected from the other industries that need it, the health industry, agri-food, and others. So is that something that you think is an issue? Is there a way you can tap into that wall of money that's going into climate change to try to address some of the challenges that you all face? Is this something, perhaps Camilla, or would you like to address this? Because agri-foods is a real issue, isn't it, in the agricultural sector, what you're dealing with. Are you getting the support you need when you see that, other industries, particularly green finance, seems to have a wall of money aimed at it? Yeah?
I think it was part of what I was mentioning before. I think that we are still not seeing big capital flows into these projects. I think that there's a huge understanding, and especially in groups like the ones we're seeing today, in which we all know that where the money should go to, but I still think there's room to go from what we believe to the action. And I personally think that it needs to go in line with what we have been talking today in depth, which is identifying those key projects, connecting the dots, bringing best practices, of course, and having all the ecosystem, including the taxonomy, including the regulation, including the incentives, to really be able to place that lot of money into where it needs to be. So I think there's still room for improvement, if you ask me personally.
Okay. Would anybody else like to weigh in on that particular topic? The issue of trying to tap into the masses of money that's aimed at green finance at the moment.
There is a very, very strong market growing for social bonds. And there is, I suppose green bonds led the way. They had the taxonomy. They have agreed bond frameworks. But you're seeing it emerging now also in the social bond area, where you have committed to deploying the sums raised in areas that are socially positive, such as education, such as health, and such as housing. So I don't think there's a major conflict between the flow into green bonds and the potential flow into social bonds. I do see them sitting side by side, and we have issued both types of paper very successfully in the last 2 years.
Excellent. Well, that's good to hear. Yes. Dominic, do you want to say something here?
Well, I think that from my perspective is that the bond financing is there in the green area, but it's not properly allocated maybe to the overall global economy in a very efficient way. If I look at in the United States, a good example will be home ownership. For years, U.S. have always championed that the American dream is to own a home. So there is tremendous focus, whether from bond financing, from commercial bank, financing on mortgages and so forth. It's an extremely, extremely efficient market. It's something that everyone seems to agree, from the government to the banking regulator to the banks to people, the consumer, they all think that owning a home is the American dream, and everybody get into it. And so the system is working very efficiently. We have all kinds of mortgage products in multiple banks, and banks are aggressively promoting home ownership through financing home ownership, because regulators always on every bank's back to making sure that we fulfill all of the goals that the government mandate. Interestingly, when I looked at climate change, sustainability, the fact is, well, for decades in US, there's just a controversial, debatable subject, until I would say for the last several years, seems to be aligning more into, well, climate change is real. So I think this is the part that is lacking. It's not just in the developing countries, but also in the developed world like United States. That is that we have 4,000 plus banks in the United States. 98% of these banks have absolutely nothing to do with anything to do with sustainability projects. Most of them, they do home mortgages, they do other regular commercial financing. They don't look into green projects. They think green projects really for either venture capitalists or private equity funds, but not for the general commercial banking. And that is misguided. And I think that if banking regulators start taking an active positioning and encouraging commercial banks, those 4,000 plus banks in the United States, to look into sustainability projects, we'll see a lot more momentum. My example at East West Bank, we've been doing sustainability financing, project financing for 2 decades. The fact is, I would tell you the first 10, 15 years, a lot of the projects from solar to electrical battery and multiple others, clean water desalination, all of those stuff, a lot of those things really didn't work too well because the technology was not quite there. Today, it's different. We used to look at electrical battery that only runs for 2 hours and then have to be recharged again. If you wanted to have it as a public bus, it just didn't work. Today, it runs all day. So all of these projects that were deemed to be not viable economically, not sustainable from a financial return standpoint, is all changed. Technology have changed so dramatically that I believe that today we need to really get those banks who are still in that ancient time to wake up. Once they wake up, there are tons of projects that is out there that is doable, from very sizable one for the multinational banks to smaller projects for the local domestic community bank that actually locate in the rural area that can help innovation in the rural areas. Those are the things that I think need to happen, and it needs a concerted effort from the government, from also with the banking regulators, with the banks all stepping up, and the demand is out there, the supply is out there.
That's very well said, Dominic. Absolutely, because as you say, technology can help, create some of those solutions that we need. And also what you mentioned earlier about how if it becomes a policy priority, which of course, the environment is today, it becomes doable, that it becomes fun, it's much more easily funded as a result because the environment is there, the framework is there to enable it to happen. Mr. Obeda, I believe you want to say something here?
Just to bring to your attention some numbers regarding especially Africa. When it comes to this continent, you should know that in a few years, 1 of 3 humans go into the work labor will be African. In this continent, we still have very poor access to electricity. And when you access to electricity, the quality of electricity is very poor. Without talking about digitalization. And when we know that those kind of infrastructure projects need 3 to 4 years to be developed, and when we see the scale, we can take the urgency of the situation. And as we are in a UN platform, I think that to have a better word, we should take in consideration how to foster the development. As we heard, today the technology exists and we can leapfrog a lot of situation to be in a condition to offer, at least to those new generations, access to energy and access to data, to conceive a better world for our future. And those projects can be done on a project finance manner, and they will be acceptable to investors and also will bring returns to their investor, to their developers, and with that we can create a new dynamics that we all hope to see initiated very soon.
Thank you. That's good to hear. Again, we're having some issues with the audio. We can't hear most of what you're saying, but I think I got the gist of what you're saying. Yes, it absolutely is necessary that we have the projects, and they are there to try to help the situation, to help communities in places that need it. Now, I'm going into the final question here, and this is, again, it's a call to action. It's what each of you can do to really try to improve the situation, to try to fill that gap we mentioned at the start, that $4 trillion SDG gap that we're currently facing, because we're not going to hit the SDGs unless this money is there, $4 trillion. So what can each of you do in your own capacity? What kind of pledge can you make to try to lessen that gap? Yes, Omar, you're brave. First one.
Happy to start. I mean, we've been in that business for multiple decades now, but our commitment, our pledge continues to be to dramatically accelerate our environmentally and socially responsible integrated development in areas that are in areas that are absolutely virgin but beautiful, and where we can build local economies from scratch, basically, and hence contribute dramatically to job creation, to GDP acceleration, and to the reduction of inequality that happens in a lot of the markets in which we operate.
Thank you for that. Colin?
Yeah, continue to do what we're doing and just do it faster, do it with greater ambition, broadly similar to yourself. Our purpose is to empower people to deliver, to build a sustainable future. And for us, that means we deploy capital to build a sustainable future. We've significantly increased the amount of capital we have at risk in this space, and we will do more. We pledge to do more, not because we can, but because we must.
Thank you. Well said. Camilla?
So my call of action would be to be more creative, more bold, because we definitely need a disruptive transformation. And for this, we need all of the entities involved, and we need all of the incentives aligned to create a change really fast.
Thank you. Obaid?
Completely share the point of innovation. I would say also we need a lot of capacity building and making some money available to early stage development project, which is the poor leg of our system. And I think this will be the real fuel for developing bankable project to asset allocator that in somewhere is seeking.
Thank you for that. Finally, Dominic.
And for me, I think that first, and I, in fact, for the last 12 months, working with 62 other business leaders from 21 different economies in the APAC region to produce a recommendations and report to the economy leaders in encouraging them to focusing on sustainability and trying to bridge the gap for SDG. And in addition to that, myself at East West Bank, we've been working on a lot of sustainability projects and provide project financing. And in multiple different areas, we were able to actually do a lot of project financing with private sector, from business enterprises from large to even middle size. And the fact is, none of those even require government subsidy, and it's working. We would have this model that we can actually transport that to developing countries and demonstrate that there are plenty of great projects, financially viable projects that fit the return threshold that is out there today. Because of the technology advancement in today's, there are all these projects out there. We are encouraging more and more business that are not only looking at US, but looking at in the development countries to identify those projects to work on. And I hope that with this sort of like get everybody out there working together, we'll be able to somehow bridge the gap of this $3 trillion deficit.
Thank you. Well, thank you for all of you ending on a fairly optimistic note there. Yes, we can each do our part. We can each play a crucial part in trying to address the Sustainable Development Goals. We can deal with these multiple crises. You've heard from our panelists that they've had a slew of solutions within their own industries that have helped address some of the issues that we've been talking about and we will talk about this week. So once again, thank you to our panelists. A big round of applause for joining us and for being very willing to dedicate themselves to this crucial cause, which is all about filling that, trying to narrow that crucial gap that we're dealing with, which is about trying to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So thank you once again, audience, and it's been a real privilege to moderate this session with such an amazing group of panelists. Thank you once again.